A chaplain, a professor who doubles up as a chaplain will have commonly experiences something like this. A student will come and say, I'm having a hard time. And the professor says, let's talk about why. If the professor is also a chaplain, with a bit of luck, he'll be able to say, what's your hope? And what's beyond that? What's your greatest hope? Something funny happens in this exchange. It appears a field of truth has been created. And this is where it's revealed to all of us who work in these fields that the philosophy of education is based on a so-called scientific model, and therefore on a particular kind of science. Is that reasonable to say that, do you think?
It is, and to the extent that we ignore the spiritual aspects of an education, I think we're making a mistake. You made me think of Rudolf Steiner and the Waldorf schools. At least we got glimpses of an ideal setting that did combine the spirit with the intellect.
And also physical development, I know they're very concerned with that. And,
physical development, artistic development.
Yes, the completeness. Yeah. However, over the last 15 years, I've had the good fortune with Dr. Dick Spady to work not on the theory of personal development, but on the idea of a group growing organizationally towards its own higher good. Dick Spady calls this administrative theory. We call it social innovation theory. One thing's clear. We can imagine and call into being a school that enacts moment by moment the sum of all educational ideals and continually revises them with experimental method, fit within the quantum theory that we can't ignore anymore. The place that I've seen that is most suitable to this is something that embraces what theologians call apostolicity, or the idea that the education is to allow oneself to become a vector of these ideals, that is to say, an apostle.
Well, Dick Spady really does get at that. Unfortunately, his ideas haven't, at this point, found a place in schools. That's not to say they won't in the future. But you brought to mind a line in the book you and he wrote. It has to do with decision-making. And it goes something like this. Every decision made in a, we'll say a school setting, I'll take it there, should be made at the lowest possible level.
Yes, there's principle of subsidiarity that's called in the Roman Catholic theology.
And that's participatory citizenship.
That's right.
That's respecting first graders, for example, and giving them the dignity of deciding so many things that they often don't get to decide.
And Bob Crone has said that the goal of all education is to create space citizens. That is to say, people who are international citizens, but with a view to the starry heavens above, which is both to do with space and also to do with the image of inspiration. Now, this is a very interesting point because it shows us that we can very easily imagine a difference between a school that is inspired or uninspired. How often have we seen movies and stories where a teacher will come in and say, I'm feeling like a complete klutz today, or I'm really inspired, you know. The goal of the theology of education as a systematic field is to move inspiration towards being a habit and then finally a vocation, so that the school of the Spirit is like a schooner rather than a galleon, a fast ship that belongs to the students, to the teachers, to the world, with all good things, going to the poor and so on, and at the same time is a vessel containing, like an ark, all the ideals of the philosophy of education.
Yes, and that has been realized, but rarely in formal education. And I think you're talking about the most important function of all. And we've seen it time and again through the ages, but very rarely in school settings.
And I think it's the reward for the work of, frankly, scholars like yourself and Dick Spady, that people like me, really working on the administrative level, have come to the point where we can understand what it means to have, say, a school of the Spirit that's also a political school. As the Jesuits used to say, everything begins in metaphysics but ends in politics. I say that everything begins in mysticism and ends in money. But when we break through these ideals of other-centeredness, something strange happens. All these complicated names have been replaced by the simple idea of a school of love. So that monks like Mark Gibbard, the Society of St. John the Evangelist write books with titles like Apprentices in Loving and says, this is all that we are. Or Archbishop William Temple says, the church or the ideal organization exists by definition for the non-members. So the school is always disappearing inside itself to come out on the other side of this Mobius strip and belong to the world.
So what we need to do is revisit that imaginary classroom that we talked about earlier and put the spiritual lens into focus and say what would be an ideal spiritual education.
I think Aristotle has given us the method in his Politics, which is to study all the extant constitutions for schools, pick out the one that is best for this particular purpose of moral education, and then extrapolate to the transcendental level of what the best would be. And so in this last minute of this conversazione, I'm able to say happily that under the leadership of Cyril Osena in Cebu City, we're going to make this school an actual one. I think today would be convenient because I read somewhere that now is the springtime of the Spirit. And I can't think of a single reason why we shouldn't use the best of our experimental methods and our understanding of profitability to have a school whose vocation is to be the moral leader of world schools. Is that fair?
It is, and I think Cirillo's our man in the Philippines to do it.
Then I think we must declare his commission operative as of this moment. And it's reasonable to say in a conversation like this that what we're doing, to use an old-fashioned word, Dr. Ellis, is the consecration of the house, something concerning which even Beethoven wrote an overture. But to be consecrated, as I say in the last 15 seconds of our time together, is to be dedicated to being the noblest, the most loving, the most inventive, the most together, and the most fun school in the world, so that all others may be inspired and follow them. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Dr. Ellis.
Thank you.
This has been Richard Kirby's Intercultural Space Station. My guest has been Dr. Arthur Ellis from Seattle Pacific University. We've been discussing the formation today of the ideal school, which so happens is in the Philippines. Until next week, happy schooling.